Once you've organized your content and created a basic document outline, creating the initial structure is actually fairly straightforward. However, as you add content, deciding how to properly structure those nested regions can become a little tricky. In many cases, you're going to be making judgment calls in terms of using one structural element over another one. So I want to examine that process in a little bit more detail as we add some additional structure to our Trails page, which I have opened from the 02_09 directory. Okay, so if I scroll down into the main article, I can see that a little bit more content has been added to this. So let's go over the structure of our article and talk about the elements inside of it that still need a little additional structure. So inside the main element, we have an H2, Trail Reviews, which is sort of the main heading of this section, if you will. Inside that is the actual article itself, the article that is the review for the North Ridge Loop, identified there by an H3. Now, below that, we have 4 heading 4s, skill level, surface, notable features, and final thoughts. Each one of those is creating an implicit section inside the article itself. So there will be paragraphs underneath them, and essentially each heading 4 is creating sort of a new section in the article, which would show up in a document outline. And so we don't really need to group those individually. We don't need to group those areas. The H4 is all we need. It's doing all the work that we need it to do. However, below final thoughts, you can see that we have a new section called comments. And let me just kind of make this look a little nicer. There we go. You can see that comments is an H3. Now, what that means is that in terms of a document outline, it shares the same tier as North Ridge Loop. So if you were to look at this in an outline view, you would see North Ridge Loop, then those 4 headings would be sort of indented inside of that. And then comments kind of comes back out again to that sort of main level. So North Ridge Loop and comments occupy the same tier. Below that, we have some introductory text that basically explains the process of leaving a comment. And then we have a comment itself. That comment is made up of 2 elements right now. We have a heading 4, which identifies who wrote it and when they wrote it, and then the comment itself, which in this case is a single paragraph, but I'm sure, most comments could contain multiple paragraphs. So you have to sort of allow for that as well. So really that comment area really needs some additional structure. We can't leave it up to just the headings to do that. And the reason for that is that we really need to group this content together and show how this content relates to each other. If we just leave the headings in place, that really isn't enough. So what I first want to think about is the sectional or structural tag to use for the entire comment region. What do I do there? There are 2 elements that come to mind first, and that would be an article or a section tag. Now, articles, remember, those are independent, like an article of clothing. It can stand alone on its own, something that you could syndicate, or that if somebody were reading it all by itself, it would kind of make sense. And in this case, that doesn't really fit that bill because comments really relies on the article content above it for context. If it were pulled out all by itself as a section of comments, people would know, hey, well, they're commenting on something, but they wouldn't really know what they were commenting on. So what I'm going to do is highlight, starting with the H3 all the way down to the closing paragraph of the comment that we have there, making sure, by the way, that I don't get the closing article tag. And I'm going to wrap this in a section tag. All right, I'm going to make this look a little nicer. There we go. And so now what we have is we have a new section of content, and it's grouping together the heading for comments, the introductory text, and then all of the individual comments themselves. And that's where we need to turn our attention to next, is how are we going to group together the actual comments, the individual comments? As I mentioned before, this is just a single comment right here, but eventually we would imagine that this page probably would have multiple comments on it, and this comment only has a single paragraph, but other comments might have multiple paragraphs or other formatting inside of it. So there really needs to be a way of sort of identifying that content in a group setting. Now, again, we go back to the structural and semantic tags that we were talking about earlier. Which one makes the most sense here? Well, each comment is an individual article within this section. And if you think about it that way, that it's an individual thing within this section of comments that can be pulled out and probably stand on its own, in that case, it sort of meets the criteria for an article tag. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to surround this with an article. Now, I'm sure there are some of you out there that probably disagree with me on that. If you do a quick survey of blogs out there for people that have formatted their blogs with HTML5 elements, most of them use article for individual comments. But there are a lot of them out there that use sections or even divs still. So really, it is a judgment call, but you want to make sure that you are semantically consistent with how it's used. So now we have this nested structure here. Inside of our article, we have a section that's encasing all of our comments. We have the comment header, which identifies the section. We have some introductory content here. And then below that, we have the individual comments themselves, which will all be nested inside of these articles. So understanding the semantic differences between the article, aside, and section elements will really help you create properly nested structures. Now, I know we didn't talk about the aside element in this exercise, but we will talk about it later in the course. Now, keep in mind, often the element that you choose to group content with is ultimately a judgment call from you as an author. Having a strategy in place for using those tags early in the planning process is really important to creating consistent site-wide markup.